Buddha. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thank you for showing up. I'm always fascinated by, and those of you who are in the back, there are seats up here if you want to come forward. You don't have to go straight to the back. Or you can, no pressure. Now that I put you all on the spot. There are still seats, yeah, you're welcome to come up, grab a seat. So I'm always fascinated by just things, people, places, teachings that have been around a long time. And so when I first encountered Buddhism, what was always neat to me was that these are teachings that have been around for 2,500 years. And things that are good, bad, or otherwise, if we're talking about things that occurred 2,500 years ago, there's probably some importance to them, some relevance, something to learn. Again, good or bad, either way, whatever, however you label that in your mind. And so the life of Siddhartha, who became called the Buddha, to me is just very inspiring. His life as a person was just really inspiring to me. And when I first kind of learned about it, it really just kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things. But, one piece of it, and he lived for 80 years. He died when he was 80. So, you have an 80-year life to kind of explore. He was a prince in the 30-second story. I'm not going to go into it now. It's not my point right now. But the 30-second version, for those who don't know, he was a prince till 29 in, kind of India region, southern part, Nepal area. And 6 years, he roamed the base of the Himalayan mountains, kind of seeking how to end suffering. 35 years old, they called him the Buddha. And he taught for 45 years, then he died at 80. So that is the shortest life story of the Buddha that you'll probably ever hear. But you can Google it for other versions. But one piece that's really fascinating to me is on his journey, during those 6 years, he came across a lot of sanghas, a lot of communities, a lot of places to practice and learn from. And obviously he learned quite a bit. And one of the things that he did along the way was there were two, Alar Kalama and the second name is escaping me, but he had two main teachers kind of towards the end of his journey. And they both wanted him to stay in that sangha, in that community, and become the teacher. And he refused, all of them. He wasn't interested in teaching anybody anything because he himself had not yet figured out how to end his suffering. So what was there for him to teach? And again, this is the very crude version of it, but he still had work to do. So he continued on his way after leaving these two. At 35 years old, he sits down under the Bodhi tree for 21 days. Again, without getting into all that right now, 5 guys come up to him and they say, "You have figured something out. We will call you the Buddha, the Awakened One." And from that, you have, in essence, 3 major schools of Buddhism. You have what's called Theravada or Hinayana, the old school teachings of the Buddha. 500 years later, you have Mahayana Buddhism. And about 1,000 years after the Buddha died, you have what's called Tibetan Buddhism or Vajrayana. So you have these 3 major schools of Buddhism. But the fascinating piece to me is that he saw the world was a mess. He saw people were suffering. He realized there were probably points along his journey that he could help people, but he still had work to do. And that to me has always been really motivating. Now, the Mahayana school Buddhism, which for me is what I practice in the Bodhisattva Path, it's a little bit different where you're helping people along the way. So you could be an unenlightened, ignorant fool and still be in the process of helping people. That's kind of the main difference between these two schools. But the Theravada school, and at the time of the Buddha, they were not there to teach anybody anything. They were there to practice. They were there to figure out, why are they suffering? That was it. And if you look at Theravada Buddhism today, kind of Southeast Asian style Buddhism, Thailand, Laos, Cambodian, you go up to Escondido, a Metaphorist monastery, that's what they practice. They're not necessarily there to teach you. They're there living their life to figure out, why are they suffering? Their greed, their anger, their ignorance, their pride, their ego, their cravings, their desires, their attachments, all these things that you hear about in Buddhism, they are in deep exploration of understanding that. So then they can bring that into the world. Now, I'll close with this thought on this before meditation. Think about how quick we are to just jump and teach everybody everything about what we think is right. And everyone must listen to us. And everybody else is wrong. And we are correct. And that's it. And so this practice, as I've talked about last week and a lot the last few weeks, isn't about fixing other people. It's not about convincing other people. It's not about changing other people. This practice, from the very beginning, as taught by the Buddha, was a deep exploration into understanding why you are suffering, not anybody else. Because if you don't fully understand from this kind of train of thought and school of teaching, if you don't fully understand the nature of your mind and why you're suffering, why would you think you can help somebody else? Now, I, in some regard, completely disagree with that school of Buddhism, but that's not my point right now, right? But that's the teaching. So as you go on this journey, whether it's day one for you learning about meditation and Buddhist practice, or whether you've been, struggling at this for 40 years, keep in mind that when you're really challenged with things, try to get quiet a little bit and go inside and understand why you're suffering. Because if you can begin to understand that on any deeper level than you do right now, you can then have a greater level of insight into understanding the suffering of others. And again, for me as a Bodhisattva practitioner in the Mahayana school of Buddhism, the practice is to help others. Right? But the more peace and calm and serenity you find within your heart and your mind, the easier it will be for you to help others. Or you can just roam around angry, miserable, and pissed off all day long and keep going. Choice is yours. So we're going to start with a meditation practice. To those who are joining virtually, glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice. I mean, you don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos, and this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture. If you're on a cushion, often it helps slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Same thing if you're on a bench or a chair, however you're seated. Just trying to sit up straight, relaxing your shoulders. Hands can be on the knees or lap. If you have a comfortable position that you're usually in where you just eventually fall asleep, I suggest coming out of that position and bringing yourself a little more attention upright if comfortable. Most important with this practice, nothing's going to happen to you. You will not think nothing. You will not shut your mind off. We're just going to sit and breathe. I'll guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever is comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Turn attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from your practice. Just sitting. Breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, It's nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samutpata. It means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in and where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That never changes. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, meditation is not going to fix that. It helps you become aware of your life that is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess so you can actually take care of yourself and make changes in your life. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, what you say, and what you do in every moment. And how your thoughts, your words, and your actions, this is called karma, not what you get, but what you give. How your thoughts, your words, and your actions impact your life and the life of those around you. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everybody and everything around us, and as I spoke about at the beginning today, we work on our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets a little more peaceful. And from that place, you create change. You don't ignore things. You don't close your eyes to things. But if you're an absolute mess, what good are you to anything or anyone? So that, for me, has always been this practice. So with that, I'll pause. I always prefer just to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. And to those who are joining virtually, again, welcome. There's a chat box on your screen somewhere. Feel free to say hello. If you have any questions, you can put them there. I'll do my best to respond. So we'll use the rest of our brief time this morning for questions.
Happy Year of the Snake. Happy Lunar New Year, everybody.
Happy Lunar New Year. Yes, sir.
Sorry, was that a question?
That works too. Thank you.
So sadness is suffering, and so I'm having trouble with, I'm sad about something that happens outside of my control, like maybe a plane crashing with people in it, that, you know. So empathy would be the emotion there, but also sadness. And not, to me, the opposite is not being empathetic and just being cold, like I don't know any of those people, so. So where does Buddhism lie between those two? Because you're trying to get rid of suffering.
What's wrong with sadness?
Okay, it's just one of the non-suffering things that you mentioned.
Hang on.
Okay.
You have a lot of answers for someone who just had a question. Right?
True.
Yes. Why is sadness suffering? What? Who said you're supposed to be happy all the time? You don't know, you're right. So, my master always said, instead of looking for answers, change the way we ask questions. And the more we learn, the more we begin to understand that sadness is a part of life. So is happiness. So is joy. So is sorrow. Things will always happen you don't like. If you didn't get sad at things, I'd be a little concerned. But you so quickly draw sadness to suffering, we must be happy all the time. If that's your equation, you're going to be miserable your entire life. Sadness is a part of life. It means you have a heart, it means you have emotions, it means you're alive. Right? I think it's important to understand that, well, two things. One, there's a sutra called the mustard, often referred to as the mustard seed sutra, where the Buddha, a woman went to the Buddha and her child had died and he wanted her to bring back her child. I mean, the dude was just a dude, so he had no magical powers anyways. But he said, go collect a mustard seed from every house that has not known death or loss or pain or sadness. She came back and she collected no mustard seeds. Everybody experiences sadness. That is not the problem. The problem is what you do with that sadness. And this is in Buddhism, we call the teaching of the second arrow. You've probably heard me talk about this. Tragic things happen. We get sad. We should get sad. I think it's a Dave Matthews song where he says, why doesn't the newscaster get just a tear in his eye when he talks about people who die? Pointing out that why are we so cold and harsh to all the pain and suffering in the world? We should feel that. But then what? So you're sad. Be sad. Second arrow is now you are angry because you're sad. Now you're sad and angry. Now you're depressed because you're sad and angry and depressed. And now you're anxious because you can't get out of your depression because you're angry because you're sad. Just experience sadness. I don't know where you got the idea that that's wrong. Sadness is part of life. Buddhist practice is not emotionless. It is not looking at the world as if you don't care. It is not pretending things are okay. It is making sure that with your sadness, you don't turn your sadness into anger and misery and depression and anxiety. Use sadness as a motivation to create change. And again, as you've heard me talk about for quite a while now, Thich Nhat Hanh coined the phrase engaged Buddhism. Engage in the world. Take that sadness, understand it. The only reason you're sad is because you have a good heart. But you don't see that. You just think, I'm sad, so I'm suffering. But if you really break down why you're sad or why you're suffering, it's, and I don't want to pretend to know what you're going through, but my guess is, from being around this quite a while, is that it's not just sadness. The sadness is not the suffering. It's the anger behind everything else that's going on that causes your suffering. The root causes of suffering are greed, anger, and ignorance, not sadness. So somewhere in that experience is greed, anger, or ignorance. So that's your next step to try to figure out. Sadness is an emotion. It's a good thing we have it, or things can get really scary. What else?
This question has to deal with mental health and its relationship with Buddhism. I know that you work with veterans that suffer from PTSD. And I wonder what the relationship is with anxiety and even bipolar disorder, ups and downs, and how you can use the tools of Buddhism. I understand meditation helps, but what more? Like how can I personally help myself with anxiety, for instance?
You're here like every day. For how many years now?
A
few years.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's helping you?
It is.
So stop asking that question. You are helping you. Not Buddhism, not meditation. You, Matt, are helping you. Why? Because you're making changes in how you see yourself and the world around you. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Keep doing that. Keep showing up. Keep letting me yell at you, and you'll be just fine. Yeah, you're doing it. You just have to come back to the practice, which I always tell you is patience. Because to you, it's never enough. To you, whatever changes you've made, whatever you've done the last few years to get yourself healthier is never enough for you. So give yourself a little break, have some compassion towards yourself as you continue to, change a lot and continue to do stupid things. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Yeah, be patient, have compassion, and just keep showing up.
I like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
You're very confrontational.
I am. You just figured that out? Is this your first day here?
Respond.
Say again?
I'm going to respond by saying my practice, especially when I'm anxious, especially when I'm taking on pain, especially when I've been exposed to things that are overwhelming, is to practice kindness and compassion all day long. And that's a big effort. I think always to start and to end any meditation with that in your heart. I will be today all that I can be in kindness and compassion to everyone I meet. Not easy when someone's confrontational.
Yeah. No, it's, you should lead some loving kindness practices. Have you ever led a loving kindness practice?
Yes, I have.
I know that. I could tell because you sounded like a wonderful loving kindness practitioner.
Yeah.
Yes. You know who's not a loving kindness practitioner? Yes. We can hang out and be friends. Yes. Yes. Some practices work for some and some work for others. So I honor your loving kindness metta practice. And 100%. For those who didn't hear it virtually, what's your name?
Bastian.
Bastian. For those who didn't hear virtually, what Bastian said was, I'm very confrontational. And I agreed with that 100%. And that for her, the best practice is to bring loving kindness and compassion every day, every moment, at the beginning, at the end of every meditation. And that was in response to the questions around anxiety. So thank you, Bastian. What else? Yeah.
I have a more technical question, if that's all right.
Sure.
And I guess maybe to start a little further upstream, because I don't want to assume anything. Like my actual question is probably predicated on this. You mentioned the 3 different types of practices. What we're practicing, is it a monistic or a dualistic view?
In what regard? Expand on that.
Kind of like the idea of self. Is a viewpoint that there is no self, or that there is? I guess that's the best way.
Yeah.
I'd be a bad person just to probably define those 2 terms, but that's how I operate.
Sure. No, so the question for those virtually who didn't hear it was in essence around self or non-self. And this is really a very fundamental core of Buddhist teaching, and that the Buddha taught that there is no inherent self. So the answer, which very rarely do I actually give direct answers to, because that's no fun, is there is no self according to Buddhist teachings. It's actually, the Buddha was raised in essence Hindu, Hindu Vedic culture, and they believed that there was this soul called an Atman that continued on. And when the Buddha taught, what he taught was that there was no permanent soul that continued. What he taught was that, as they did in India for the most part, they all believed in a continuation of consciousness. And so it's called Alaya Vijnana, a storehouse consciousness, in essence a collection of your karma, that when the physical body died, and I'll come back to your question, but I want to put some context around it, that when the physical body died, that the consciousness would continue on. Now again, for those who are brand new, maybe 2,500 years ago in India, they pretty much all believed this. Right? If you told them that you had one life and you're going to heaven or hell, they would have thought you were absolutely crazy. Now fast forward to today, and the average person in Western culture believes that you have one life, you're going to heaven or hell. And if you introduce this idea of continuation of consciousness or reincarnation or rebirth or whatever school of Buddhism or term you use, most people today can't embrace that concept because we didn't grow up with that. So to think that there's something, a continuation or rebirth or anything like that is very odd for many Western people. Not everybody, but for many. So when the Buddha was teaching, he was teaching to an audience, so to speak, of people that already just knew, believed that they were going to have a rebirth. Does that make sense so far? So when the question and the teachings around non-self arise, the question then is, what is it that is reborn? I don't have any answers for you here. I have a bunch of questions for you to continue to dig into this, right? But when we die, what is it that's reborn? What's your name? Matt. So when Matt dies, that Matt, if rebirth is a thing, if a continuation of consciousness is a thing, if reincarnation is a thing, what is reborn? Matt? Matt's arm? Matt's hat? Matt's foot? What is Matt is really the question. And this dives into the Buddhist teachings around emptiness, called shunyata. And that, in essence, well, let me give it to you this way. So you're sitting on what right now?
Bench.
A bench. Is it just a bench?
No.
No. What else is it?
Molecules.
Molecules. Oh, you're smart. That's good. Yeah. What molecules? What else?
Space.
Space. Where did it come from?
No idea.
It's wood, right? So where did it come from?
The forest.
The forest. There we go. A tree, right? And what did that forest and that tree need to grow?
Sunlight, rain, nutrients.
Yeah, a lot, right? But we come in and we just sit on it. So when you sat down on that bench, did you think about the forest or the sunlight or the nutrients or the molecules or the rain? No. That's how you use it in this moment. So the emptiness teachings, in one way to look at it, is to understand that everything is contingent upon something else for its existence. And we don't know exactly what anything is other than how we're using it in that moment. Right? So we just sit on a bench. But what this teaching does for me in practice is when you begin to see the emptiness of all phenomena, all people, all places, all things, you understand that you really don't know anything about it or them. But we form these opinions and these ideas based on tiny little bite-sized samples of something. And then we put that in a box and we say, the rest of my life, that's just a bench. Right? But I would give gratitude to Emanuel Swedenborg, who lived over 200 years ago in the 1700s, built the Swedenborgian congregation, who their local chapter came together in the 20s, built this church. And because of Emanuel Swedenborg from 250 years ago, you got that bench. So what the practice of emptiness does is it helps us have gratitude, for me as a practitioner, and appreciation for everything. To have gratitude for the bench. To have gratitude for having sadness. Again, be grateful that you have sadness. Have gratitude for everything. And then the question coming back, does that make sense so far? Then the question coming back to non-self is like, okay, well then who is it that's having gratitude? If 10 people describe Matt, right? You have 10 people in your life that know you?
Yes.
Would they all say the same thing about you?
No.
No. Who's right? They all have just views and judgments and opinions. But in the concept of rebirth, who is reborn? Well, in the Buddhist teachings, technically, to your kind of, your technical word earlier, it is called a storehouse of consciousness. It is a collection of karma that when the physical body dies, leaves the physical body, floats around in the bardo for up to 49 days, and at some point on a seventh day of 49 days, that consciousness is reborn into physical form. Right? You have sperm, you have egg, comes together, consciousness enters, and you have life. So what the Buddha was saying is that there is no permanent self. And to wrap up this thought, which is important, especially if you've never heard this, it doesn't mean you don't exist. Right? I mean, do your arms hurt right now? No. So if we came up and chopped your arm off, it would hurt. You're there. You're physically there. Mentally there, emotionally there, but you're just there differently from how you perceive yourself to be and how everyone else perceives you. And every experience in your life is the same. And that's where you get into Buddhist teachings around everything being an illusion. It doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's only your what? Perception. Say again?
Oh, I said consciousness.
Yeah, it's your perception of reality. So emptiness teachings ties into this. This kind of breaks down for me the understanding, intellectually at least, of non-self. But then ultimately the question is, well, what good is all this if you can't practice it? So what if you can talk about storehouse consciousness, and you can talk about emptiness, and you can talk about non-self? The reality is, you're all going to get out here in a little bit and go do whatever you're going to do, and you're going to have every opportunity, every moment today to either be nice to people or not. Right? And you're going to have every opportunity today to either be nice to yourself or not. Right? Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen School, he lived from 1200 to 1253. He would say you must get to know the self before you can get rid of the self. So non-self isn't like shattering or destroying your ego. I mean, that's when I came into Buddhism initially, that was like, I'm going to shatter my ego. Like, that's the most egotistical thing there is. I'm going to use my ego to destroy my ego, and then I'm going to let you know that I have no ego. I mean, how stupid is that? Right? So, get to know the sense of self. Right? Yeah?
So, the thing that arises for me for that, like, having that understanding, like, how does that insight arise in, like, for me, a practice when I'd say I'm paying attention to my breath? That kind of presupposes that there's something paying attention, like it's subject and object.
Yeah.
So, how would that, like, so in practice of that, it feels like that would reinforce that type of separation. So how does that practice eventually end up with an understanding of the self?
Spend every day for the next 7 years focusing on sensation of breath for a period of time. And then you'll have a better answer to that question than I will. Truly. You can also read Alan Watts. It's a great. Are you brand new to this stuff? You read a little bit. Where are you at?
I put my toe in a lot over the last 10 years, and I do know Alan Watts.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Watts breaks down exactly what you're talking about. Kind of go back into that. Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, Shunryu Suzuki. The Zen teachings are really breaking down what you're talking about. I think it is a practice, but this idea from Dogen is quote, in essence, is he calls it beyond thinking, where while abiding in sensation of breath from his teachings, the body and mind fall away. So there is no self, there is no body, there is no mind. You're just left with sensation of breath. But it's not even you or your breath. It's just breath. And when the breath is gone, you ain't got to worry about it anymore. Does that make sense?
Weirdly, yes.
Yes. So, yeah, it's fun stuff. What else? Yeah.
Now I'm learning to be kind, have compassion, and be generous. But what happens when I have a negative feeling inside? How do I deal with that? Do I ignore them?
Yeah. So the question for those virtually who didn't hear it was, you're working on kindness, compassion, generosity, but what happens and what do you do when you have negative feelings inside? You ignore them. In brief, just so I don't forget to say this, do not ignore what you're referring to as negative feelings. My first suggestion would be this idea of negative, this idea of sadness. These are all labels and constructs we're putting on emotions as they arise. Make sense so far? And the idea is that these, what you're calling negative feelings, if you first stop, if you abandon this idea of it being negative, because we build these constructs into our head, and as soon as you tell yourself, as soon as Paul says, I'm so negative, how does that make you feel to say you're so negative? Bad.
I'm a bad person.
Right, now you're a bad person because you have negative feelings. That's what you're telling yourself. So my suggestion is to abandon this idea of calling it a negative feeling and look at it as just thoughts arising. It doesn't mean they're pleasant. The Buddha talked about pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. These thoughts that are arising might not be pleasant. They might be very unpleasant, but are they permanent? No. And this brings in the Buddhist teachings of impermanence. understanding that these thoughts that arise, like clouds passing overhead, they just pass. Do you always have what you call negative feelings? Do you always have that? No. So again, coming back to the second arrow concept of observe the negative feelings. Don't ignore them. This practice to me is not about suppressing anything. It's actually opening up to understanding, first and foremost, where are what you're calling negative feelings coming from? And if you look at the second noble truth on Buddhist teachings, again, coming back to the greed, anger, and ignorance, is to explore. Why are you feeling so negatively? And it will be rooted in some sense of craving, desire, things to be differently from how you want them to be, some sort of anger or hatred or aversion, and some sort of ignorance, meaning you're lost in your perception of how you want things to be. So the practice, which in essence is what you started your question with, is to, when you recognize that the greed is there, that's where you practice generosity. So in that moment of feeling so negative, be generous to yourself. Give yourself some kindness. Give yourself a little, pat on the back that says, I'm working on this. And when you recognize the anger is there and the hatred, then that's where you refer to the Kuan Yin and you pour yourself some compassion towards yourself and all beings. And you recognize the ignorance, you practice the wisdom that says, I am stuck in my reality. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to feel, as you call, negative. But you don't want to get stuck there. Observe it, see it as the nature of the mind, working through situations, and be patient. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I had a first time here, so when you brought up karma, and my perception of karma throughout is a little different than to give. It's more like reap what you sow.
Yeah.
You're hoping that whoever, caused you injury, or maybe how you perceived it, you're hoping that somewhere along the spectrum of the universe that they'll get there.
Which I know you would never think, because I've known you a long time.
No. Changing a lot.
You're just referring to other people, yes.
Yeah, because, so my ideal of karma was...
Yeah.
So that's an interesting perception, to be able to give and to let some of that go, and or maybe the ideal that someone will get not punished, but they'll get whatever they deserve in life based on their practices, which is outside of what I should even be worried about.
Sure.
Sometimes the idea.
Yeah, there you go. Look at that. Not bad for first time here.
Yeah.
This idea of karma is, for me, it's one of the most misunderstood words in kind of Western Buddhism. But the word karma, it's just the literal translation of the word karma means action. Right? There was a comic years ago I thought was really fascinating, describing how just twisted our views are on what karma actually is. And it was a person sitting there, and there was like these Stonehenge kind of tower, going around, like big Stonehenge things going around like dominoes. And the person is pushing this way, and it shows them starting to fall. But it's in like a circle back on this person. And underneath it says karma. It's probably some whatever newspaper comic strip. And I was like, that's not what karma is. Karma, you've played pool before, seen a pool table, right? Karma is, let me start here, literally action. That's what the word means. And the Buddha taught we generate karma 3 ways. Body, speech, mind. With our thoughts, with our words, and with our actions. So karma isn't what we get, it's what we give. A cue ball. You play pool, you hit the cue ball into the rack, right? Every time that white ball hits the rack, every ball goes into a different direction, right? Our entire lives, for me, this is what has always helped with practicing how I bring karma into the world, is understanding that I am that cue ball. Every person, every place, everything I encounter, I'm leaving an impact. That's really dangerous, right? I mean, you know how dangerous it is for me to sit here and say all this stuff to you? Because some people actually listen to stuff I say, and that's really dangerous. Right? So the practice within Buddhism is to be a kind of an expression of being mindful of your karma. Not mindful of what you're getting, but mindful of what you're giving. What are your thoughts? What are your words? What are your actions? And how do those impact the world around you? And then the idea about others is that, and you kind of hit it on the end a little bit, everybody has their own karma. Everyone is on their own path. There is an expression in Buddhism that says, all karmic seeds bear fruit. Kind of the reap what you sow idea of what you said. But it requires us, in understanding other people's karma, or that other people have their own karma, it requires us trying to, which can be, and I can saw, to me, just the way your expression was, it almost felt like, wow, it would be liberating a little bit if you stopped trying to hope that everybody else gets the karma that's coming to them. As if you have some control over that anyways. Right? We all have our own journey. Each person has their own journey. So again, this practice is being mindful of what I bring into the world. And that's really hard, because what do we want to do most of our lives? We want to point fingers at everybody else and say everything is their fault. And they're to blame.
Or possibly if you're like a caretaker, it's not necessarily pointing a finger, but maybe taking on too much
Absolutely.
of other people's whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Places like this tend to get lots of, and I use the word caretaker very loosely, people who care for others, teachers, educators, people in, professions, careers, or families where you're caring about other people. You see a lot of those people around places like this because their hearts are just so raw and open, and therefore that pain is really felt. So, yeah. One more hand I saw, and then we'll close. Oh, yeah, Nick.
Sure. If you look up the Four Noble Truths, the second one is typically the cause of suffering is desire. You often say that it's greed, anger, and ignorance.
Yeah.
How do these fit together?
Sure.
The three poisons I'm familiar with, and where's this discrepancy between Google and how you prefer to
Because for those, I always tell people when I go through the Four Noble Truths, right? I'll close with this thought, and let me start with a little background for those who don't know it. The first thing the Buddha taught when he became called the Buddha, right, was the Four Noble Truths. The first thing he said is life is filled with dukkha. Dukkha translates to suffering. If you're brand new and you hear life is filled with suffering, well, that's miserable, right? There's a guy years ago opened up a Buddhist book and he said, well, life is suffering. I have no interest in this Buddhist stuff. I'm good, right? And then 15 years later, he turned to page 2 and realized that there's more to it than just suffering. But dukkha, suffering, again, another kind of coming back to the word karma in the West, we think suffering is heavy. It's traumatic. It's painful. But discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, right? Hating mayonnaise. You order a sandwich and say no mayo and you get mayonnaise on your sandwich. You're not going to die unless you're allergic to mayonnaise. But this is dukkha also. This is suffering, right? You don't like the way your hair looks. You don't like the way your shirt looks. You don't like the way your car looks. You don't like where you live. You don't like what, all this stuff. We experience little stuff throughout our day. The way your coffee's made, all these little things. This is dukkha. And so what the Buddha was saying, to my understanding, was that life is filled with moments like this. Throughout every single day today, you're going to have moments that you feel discomfort. It's just going to happen. So the second noble truth is the cause of suffering, which is the nature of your question. And the way I always say it is greed, anger, and ignorance. I also add craving and desire very often. I'll come back to your question in a second. The third one, and so we overcome greed, anger, ignorance with the practice of generosity, compassion, and wisdom, as I said. The third noble truth is the ending of suffering. This is nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. Or as I like to say, a happy day. Okay? And then the fourth is the path. And this is called the Eightfold Path. Working on having correct views, often words correct or right. Again, if you read 10 translations, you'll read 10 different words. But correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. This, in essence, is your karma. This is what you're bringing into the world with what you think, what you say, and what you do. Thoughts, words, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. Or views, thoughts. This is where I always say, all of that is available for free on Google. You Google Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, it's all there. And what you're going to read is a ton of different translations of those words, right? coming from initially what was written down in Pali, right, and then translated Pali, Sanskrit, translated various languages, Chinese into English. So many different translations of those words. Greed, you will often read craving and desire. Anger, you'll often read hatred. I said those earlier, hatred and aversion. And ignorance, I usually just see ignorance, but there are other translations out there, you know. So I think if you break down this idea of what is greed, or you said desire, right? As the Buddha said, just to kind of bring this into it, there are healthy cravings, there are healthy desires. The desire to suffer less, the desire to minimize your suffering and the suffering of those around you, that's a wonderful desire to have. The problem is the attachment to that. That when you aren't minimizing your suffering, as by some of the questions today, and you start to think like, oh, I'm not there yet, you're attached to the outcome. And I think to me, I always use, just very personally, you know, we've been sitting together a long time, I always use the word greed because I think it's really from my personal practice and for those I've been around, you know, this for the last 20 plus years, I find most people have an easier time looking at where they're greedy in their life than, or let me put it this way, I think people have an easier time justifying their cravings and desires than they do justifying greed. So it really is just semantics. It's just the way that word sounds to me and feels in the English language. Greed is like, yeah, I want too much stuff, you know? Yeah. Does that help kind of address your question? Yeah. And I think it's important also, and I'll close with this thought, is that any translation you read of any Buddhist teachings are all coming from, for the most part, unenlightened folks doing their best to translate what they think the Buddha actually said. So, you know, yeah. So I'll close with that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who lost their lives in the terrible crash. May their family be free from suffering. All right, a few announcements before you all head out. Thanks for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma Bum. We opened up this temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not teachers, we're not masters, we're not looking for students. We're just unenlightened practitioners doing our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. Every night we have different people who show up leading from a different Buddhist tradition. Every Thursday at 4:30, we do, I think, probably the best thing around here. It's a food redistribution program. We prepare gourmet vegetarian meals, also known as peanut butter and jelly, and we feed people who sleep on a sidewalk. So anytime you think your life sucks and you lack gratitude, feed people sleeping on a sidewalk, and it tends to put things into perspective. And if it doesn't work, keep going back. First Saturday of the month, so we had probably 10, 15 people downstairs. We do a half day of silence retreat. It's 4 hours of silence. So if 20 minutes of meditation is absolute torture for you, then I strongly recommend doing it for 4 hours. It then makes 20 minutes much easier. And it's not 4 hours straight. It's about a 20-minute silent meditation, which gets broken up with some walking and some cleaning and various things in between. So that's the first Saturday of every month. Other than that, I don't think there's any other announcements. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Buddha for You is there if you need anything. And appreciate you.